There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our book study at St. Hilary's. We have some people here in the room. We're gonna just smile for the camera. Welcome, everybody. And I'm Reverend Adrian. And anybody who wants to watch this later, if you have any questions and you're not watching it live, don't hesitate to email us or join us next week and ask your questions. Today, before you book for a second, just want to show it. We are continuing with our study of Made for Goodness by Bishop Desmond Tutu and his daughter, Po Tutu. Last week, we covered the first couple of chapters, and I've sent out summaries of chapters 3 and 4. It's a longer book than we have time to deal with detail of every chapter. So we've picked the ones we're going to highlight, but we're also providing you written summaries of the other chapters as well. And if you haven't received those, give me an email and I will send it to you. Today, we're looking at chapter 5 and 6. And chapter 5, which I will do, and chapter 6, which Janet will lead us in. Chapter 5 is called The Habits of Wrongness. Habits of Wrongness. Last week, we heard from Bishop Tutu his belief that we are made from goodness, and that comes from the fact, an undeniable fact, that we are made by God, for God, like God, and God is the essence of goodness, and therefore so are we. We are not God, but we are like God. We walk away from that sometimes, we turn away from being good, but we can find the goodness within ourselves and always come back. The habits of wrongness. Well, his theory is that taunts of racism are learned young. In other words, we're born good. And as we grow, we learn from our surroundings, we learn from our parents, our teachers, the kids on the school ground, and we pick up things, habits. And in this case, perhaps we pick up signs that racism is a good thing, or that it is a natural part of our existence. He says we learn this very young, and that it doesn't come naturally. It runs against the grain. You have to work at being evil, and you have to work at racism. And the painful effects of racism are felt early too. And you carry those scars right through your whole life, And those insults of racism are employed daily. For some people, you experience it young. He certainly did. Insults and evil. He tells a story about his father, who was the principal of a very well-known school, I believe a private school, and really revered in his community. But that when he went into a local grocery store to purchase things, which was owned by a white Afrikaner, he was referred to as a boy and treated very badly. And he stood there as a young boy and saw this shameful behavior of these people towards his father. And from a very early age, realized that there are some in life that are better than others. At least that was the message that was being given out at that time. And so we live out what we have learned. I don't know if any of you have ever been taught something when you were a kid, and as you got older, you began to question what you were taught. And then started asking other people, hopefully, and found out that maybe that wasn't quite true. Maybe there is choice. There's a different way of looking at things. Have you? I see your head nodding. Yeah. Anybody able to give us an example of that? Well, my family, I do know that some of my relatives had they wouldn't call them racist ideas, but that's what they were given as a child. And they used language you wouldn't even consider learning today and using today. Whenever the subject came up, they just immediately shifted into this ugly language, with these thoughts that they'd been given as kids, that some people weren't equal to others. And I heard this as a child, but I do remember as a kid thinking, I was never comfortable with it, but it's what your grandma taught you. And you have to take that seriously. You do, you take that very seriously. Yeah. He lived, pardon? Go ahead.
I just trying to think of something that is all of our experiences are different. So I didn't grow up in the Canadian society, so I didn't have to jostle with being not equal or
Okay.
anything like that. But Trinidad had its own levels of acceptance. You know, I lived in the country and went to school in the city.
Oh.
So you're a country bumpkin, you know. Yeah. And I remember one time I wanted to join the choir in school, high school, and only the kids who lived in the city, for some reason, they were the ones chosen.
Huh.
You know, so I ended up not singing in the choir, but I didn't take it as a slight or anything, but I just said, well, maybe that wasn't for me.
That's a
so
shame.
Maybe when you have these things happen to you, you have a choice how you can react to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in his case, as in his case, he was wondering about his father and how his father felt being called boy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's standing as a boy, a little boy, and seeing a clerk behind the counter who is a third of your father's age, referring to him as a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, it makes you, I would think, feel very limited. Mm-hmm. and put down. Mm-hmm. And so reactions that in some cases could be anger. Mm-hmm. You know, you could be very angry at the society. Mm-hmm. or and lash out. Mm-hmm. Or you can live with this I'm not good enough sort of thing.
Which is the demon, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he spoke about in that previous chapter.
Yeah. I'm not good enough. Yeah. I'm not good enough. I wouldn't be accepted in those circles. Sort of.
Right.
But, so reactions are different. Yeah.
And his dad was really caught between a rock and a hard place, because if he responded and said, no, you treat me like a human being, this young woman lived within a society which had this racist apartheid structure entrenched in it. So he wouldn't just be maybe having a conversation with her, he would be seen to be challenged the entire structure of their society. And we all know that in those days, the weight of retribution could be quite heavy, and he may not have survived it. So he stood there and he received the insult and lived with it while his son watched it and began to perceive the world in that model. He says, we live out what we have learned. Now, he lived in an apartheid, and I just want to give you his definition of apartheid: a sweeping set of laws and regulations that determine every aspect of a person's life on the basis of their race. It was experienced as a series of daily injustices and humiliations against people of color that stoked the anger of Black people and dulled the sensibilities of white people. And you can see that in that example, can't you? This young woman, she just didn't know any better. It's not like she was a full adult. She was a young woman working in her father's shop. Bless you. Who, this is what she'd been taught too. And then you can understand the anger being stoked. Racism is a process. It's not a law in that it's a law of nature. It's not an instinct. It's a process that he says we learn as you get older. And as you grow up in an apartheid system, or even in our culture, you see those subtle things that build the truth behind that belief. Truth as in the power is here and it supports this model, therefore it is real, as opposed to truth being a universal justice. And so it's something you see as a kid growing up. I didn't grow up in a city or a town that had, 2 water fountains, one saying for colored people and one for whites only, but they existed and you saw them in the States.
Yeah, I saw them in the States a lot when we traveled there. And we were in the South, so that's the way it was in the 60s, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And she explained it to me and how wrong it was. But yeah, it was definitely evident in the States when you traveled.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, I was in a smaller town outside of Toronto, not that far. Now it's just a suburb, Whitby, right? And we had 1 or 2 Chinese kids and maybe 1 or 2 Black kids in our class. And, they struggled. You could see that they struggled. They were sort of treated the same, but then not treated the same, not fully included and included. There weren't signs saying Black kids over here, white kids over here, but it happened and you could hear it on the schoolyard and from certain, from kids who learned it at home. And it builds. He says racism is evil and it goes against the grain of creation. Remember last week we talked about when you look at the Bible, you look at creation, God saw that it was good. God created it all. He didn't create just one and say, you're in charge and I'm going to make you so this one can kick you around, control you, beat you up. He didn't do that. God did not do that. God created, I always love that, the field of flowers, if you've ever seen a wildflower. There are some highways in Ontario where they threw wildflower seed in the median in between the north and south or east and west roads. And when they're in bloom, there are millions of different, well, it looks like millions, it may not be, hundreds of different wildflowers all the way up. And it's just this plethora of diversity. That's God. And that's kind of what he's saying here, I think. The grain of creation is this diversity, this beauty, this equality, this love. And so racism runs against all of that. It says, because we're made for goodness, the instinct to do what is right, it has to be eroded within us. It's not gone and we have to build it, build goodness. No, goodness is there. And we need these things as we learn, as we grow older, as kids, teenagers, those things that we're taught that erode our goodness. And the really terrifying thing is when you're a little guy, you don't know that's what's going on. You don't know what you're being taught is unjust, and that it's actually eroding your inner goodness. You don't know that. Not quite the same thing, but when my oldest son, who's now 23, he was about 3.5, 4, and we went to an outlet mall and we went into the big Tupperware store or one of those. Anyway, they had all this stuff, and in an area that was blocked off, they had a bunch of plastic rubber toys for kids. And a couple of them were those little cars they could get in and pedal with their feet. And there were lots of kids in there. And we saw one, it wasn't being used. So we walked over to it, and he had one foot in, he was bringing his other foot in. And this kid came up who was about twice his age and brawny, grabbed my son and threw him on the floor, got in the cart and took off. And I came running up. I said, wait a minute, stop. That is wrong. You can't do that. And his father stood on the edge and applauded his son's behavior.
Oh,
You kidding?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And my son was stunned. He didn't know what was going on. And I was a third the size of this man. And nobody came to help me, and they'd seen it. I know it was a moment of anguish and a little bit of fear, because if I went over to this man and I said something to him, and he just walked away and applauded his son, and I just thought, wow, it's there, it's there.
That's how wars get started.
Yeah, and yeah. So and the son was a mirror image of his father, which was a real shame. It'd be interesting to know where they are right now. He says that in apartheid, the details of dehumanizing become important. And I would add, they're all very planned and deliberate. Things like a separate door, different amenities, exclusive beaches, making sure that the colors, I'm not going to say race, because race does not have any biological basis. It's a made up term. It has no scientific truth. People use that term to reinforce apartheid-like thinking. And these separations, and they start small sometimes, and they grow. And each privilege adopted for, in this case, whites, and each limitation imposed on blacks, they make the next limitation, the next control mechanism, seem more like an entitlement or natural punishment. If you can get away with the first one, you begin to build a numbness, and people, if they accept it and they put up with it, the next one gets through maybe a little bit easier. And then the next one, and the next one. You saw that in Nazi Germany, the way they deliberately attacked the Jews and gypsies and others. That was done in the beginning slowly and deliberately, and it built a numbness in the people, and it also allowed people to point fingers and blame someone. And I think that's what he's talking about here. What do you think?
Yeah, he speaks about little things, it comes slow against like a silent leak, and until the earth is flooded.
Yeah.
You uncorrected missteps. Like he spoke about padded expense reports, trained illnesses, and
That's right.
and half truths. Like you don't know the whole thing, but you give something that grows. It's like it grows from like a mustard seed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's small, but then it grows, and you don't stop it. Your child comes home with a pencil, and you didn't give him that pencil.
Yeah. Where did the pencil come from?
He says you didn't question him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a small thing. And
Then it's
he
okay
comes
to
home
take
with
that
something
pencil,
bigger. And by the time he's a teenager, he's a good thief.
Yes, yes.
So this is what this apartheid thing is like. It's,
And things become that you talked about expense reports. I remember a situation where someone was on a daily per diem, and they were going out and about and doing all these meetings. They were doing them all, but they'd have lunch somewhere, and they'd bring back two bills from lunch because they said they were entertaining a client, but they weren't. They had their bill, and they had another bill that they picked up off a table, And this became a regular practice. And over time, the amount of money that was stolen from the company, it became quite large in amounts. Yeah. But once you get used to it, you figure out ways to do more. You erode your own goodness sometimes. Yeah.
I, I, I was listening to a preacher on the radio, and she was talking about simple things that um, as I said, the pencil, the office
Supplies.
supplies that are given to you, and you just
Yeah.
take it as your own, take home a notepad today, and
Yeah.
or go into the grocery store and you don't put the things back where they come from. Little things like that,
Yeah.
you decide, oh, this meat, I don't want it, so I'm gonna just stick it on the shelf,
Yeah. Instead of in the cooler.
but it's not in the cooler.
Yeah.
And somebody working there takes it and put it back in the cooler.
Yeah.
But that meat has been on that shelf for a little while.
And it's spoiled.
So the little things that we do, we sometimes affect a lot of on a bigger scale.
Yeah. And we justify some of those actions by saying things like, well, it's not fair that I can't afford this. I should be able to, for instance, you buy a big bag of grapes and you eat the grapes as you go through the store. You get to the counter and there's half the grapes left. And you pay for those half, but you didn't pay for the half you've eaten. Those little things, you kind of go, well, I'm owed that, for all sorts of reasons. You justify it.
And people that steal the office, well, they don't pay me enough anyway, so.
Yes.
That's right.
That's
That's
the
right.
way, well, if I take a pen or two, well, stealing's stealing, right?
Yeah.
And so they say, oh, just take it. No,
Yeah.
and I remember as far as, today goes, people like where I work, they will give us masks. We all have to wear the same mask, all of us. But a lot of people will take extras to go home and then wear them back. I usually keep the same one on all day and then throw it out when I get home. But they'll say, well, we'll take an extra one, you can wear this one. And I go, but the company paid for that.
Mhm.
And I go, oh yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I won't do it. But a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And there's that line that you feel uncomfortable stepping over, but at the same time, you have somebody encouraging you. And they encourage a system that they also benefit from. And that's would have been that young woman standing behind the counter in that shop, being a white woman, would have benefited from their system. And just that feeling of power by diminishing somebody else. Like there are different types of power, and one comes from me diminishing you, as opposed to us working together. Power over as a power amongst and within. They're very different types of power, but and you kind of feel, some people, there are moments where you feel good about that, but that's wrong. Yeah.
But in the case of Desmond Tutu, it is a system that is systemic thing, sort of thing.
Everything where he lived. Yeah.
It was systemic. They created it so that one person, one group of people suffered at the
Yep.
existed to
Yeah. As he said, each privilege adopted for the whites and each limitation imposed on the blacks made the next one seem more an entitlement or natural punishment. In other words, it reinforced that system. So he asked the questions: if we're made for goodness, where does wrong come from? I'll bet you've all asked yourself, well, where does evil come from? He says evil takes root by a series of small decisions, which is kind of what we've been talking about. Yeah. And you can see that in the Old Testament. You had Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And they were given the opportunity to live there, and they were also given some choice. God didn't put them in there and prescribe their behavior. God said, I love you, you're in my likeness, therefore you have choice. And they made a choice. The first drip of depravity entered creation when they made that choice to do something they were asked not to. Now, he says in the book, and I have to smile every time I read this, he says, like every miscreant, wonderful word, after him, Adam tries to minimize his own responsibility by shifting the blame, first to God and then to Eve. He really doesn't own his own role.
Yeah.
And you see that all the time, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, you have religions, you have governments blaming God first. Well, no, God didn't give you that decision to make. You chose it.
There was a case of a minister in the local government here,
Mhm.
in Ontario, and he was taking the money that was supposed to be given out to be spent on roads and different things. I can't remember why he was getting it, but the government had the money, and what he did was he put out bank accounts in the name of his son, in the name of his wife, and they were all working in the same government office.
I think I remember this vaguely.
Yeah, and the excuse, I think, was so paltry that he gave why he did this. They all couldn't understand why did you do this?
Right.
You had a good job, you have all your family working in government and everything. Why would you,
Mm-hmm.
And the excuse was so unacceptable.
How do you justify it?
No.
Well, somewhere inside you enjoy getting.
Yeah.
And so you just take.
You didn't think you would get caught or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and you're moving us through this quite nicely. He talks about the Rwandan genocide and South Africa's apartheid system not springing from nothing into full bloom. Like it wasn't not there one day and then fully in bloom the next day. He said, in each case, the path from goodness to evil was laid carefully in order to permit ourselves to inflict harm. Our actions must be accompanied by a host of rationalizations and justifications, which is probably what that minister did. He rationalized and justified what he was doing, even if it
that's
was
what
wrong.
happens when you get caught. You have to rationalize what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have to give some reason to it. The other person can't understand it, but you do it. You're caught, and all of a sudden you're saying, well,
Yeah.
It's
he talks
beyond the realm of understanding.
Yes, it does get to that point, doesn't it? Yeah. In reference to South Africa's apartheid system and what happened in Rwanda and what happened during the Second World War, he talks about the steps that get you there. He says, you begin by describing the other as different. That person is different than me. Then you sort of begin to establish them as less or worse than us. And that moves them on to comparisons that liken them to animals. And, at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900s, there was science that looked at the world, people in the world, and they said at the top of the chain is the Caucasian, then there's the Mongoloid, Asian, then there's the Negroid, and then there's the animal. And you move down these ranks, and that's the way they classified the world. And it was also justification for the doctrine of discovery, or they weren't putting them in that terms, but that's what they were saying. I'm sorry, I actually sat through 2 days of anti-racism training last week, and that's where that came from. And it leads you to the point where you begin to believe that these other people, they have no value. Sometimes they're even referred to as vermin, and you must destroy them. Thus the Jews, the Holocaust. I mean, and Hitler was using them for all sorts of reasons, because anything that went wrong, he pointed at them, and everybody blamed them, even though it wasn't. We all know that. He says, in the Bible, depravity does not enter creation in a tidal wave of wrongness. It comes in slowly and silently. And as you talked earlier, drip by drip. Starts with eating a pomegranate, an apple off a tree. And then it moves even further by denying it and then not taking responsibility of your own actions. All of that was happening in the garden. And God said, okay, you have to live out there now. And because of this reality, he talks about rules of life. Now, what are rules of life? Well, they're usually associated with religious groups, and they are ways, they're a discipline, a way of living your day, and also self-examination, prayer multiple times a day. But at some point in the day, you stop and you ask, where was God in my day? And what were my actions? And you may look at a specific incident and you can ask, where was God in that incident? Was God with me or not with me in my actions? Were my actions necessary, or were they simply nice? Were they good? And you have to be honest and ask yourself. And what this daily discipline does is it brings you back to zero again every day. You kind of look at your day, you look at your behavior, you look for God in your day and in your actions. And if you're being really honest with yourself, so there's almost a contract in these where you must be honest. And you say, you know what I did was not necessary. And it was not nice.
I guess like in reaction to different things, like there's an advertisement where two people, a guy hits another guy, and they come out and they're firing up at each other, but eventually the one that hit the other said, okay, I like your hair. You know.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas normally when you have an accident, you come out fighting. You
That's
to,
right. I've seen them and they walk off together kind of friendly.
Yeah. The one who gets hit is really raging. And what are you thinking of? Why are you going so fast? Why are you falling so close to me? And give me your insurance and all this kind of stuff, you know. Yeah. And the one that hits, he's saying, I didn't do any wrong, you stopped. You know, so they're putting the blame on each other, you know, which is normal.
Yeah.
Everyday stuff.
But if you were able to employ this kind of a practice, even at that moment, you'd stop, you'd see it for what it was, you'd own your responsibility, you'd make an apology if you really needed to make the apology, and then you'd work with the person to sort out the problem. Yeah. And you'd both walk away still whole and intact. Yeah, and still your core of goodness strong. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think a lot of it too is a learning process. Like some of us take a lot longer than others.
Yeah.
To
Learning
some of this stuff.
And unlearning, which is something he talks about, you know, because when you're taught from day one that being a bully is okay, you have to learn how to unlearn that and stop believing it. And then changing behavior is one of the hardest things you'll ever do.
Did he say something about parenting in this one?
I'm sorry?
Did he say anything about parenting? Like how parents deal with things that your child does?
Patience.
Yeah.
That's definitely in the next chapter, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
And you're definitely right it is how you grow up too. And I don't want to get into details, but I mean, it definitely is the environment
Yeah,
and everything that you grow up. Sometimes you can, like, you react because that's what you,
Been taught.
that's what you see. So then,
Mhm.
you know, it's not right.
Mm-mm.
It's not right, but that's what you've learned.
Yeah. They talk about multi-generational behaviors. And when we talk about, for instance, the impact of the residential schools being multi-generational, well, of course it is, because those first kids that went, so much trauma, never given the support they needed to recover from that trauma, sent back out into the world to try and make a life and raise families, being traumatized and having learned horrific things. That's all they know. And so they repeat those behaviors and those beliefs and those horrendous things. And then their kids grow up with all of that. So it does become multi-generational. That's
It is very difficult to break the cycle.
yeah.
yeah.
It's very difficult.
So if you can start believing that you're made from goodness, and hopefully your parents teach you that as much as your priest does and Bishop Tutu, and then you try to without really thinking about it, you have a rule of life, a daily discipline, in that as you go through life, you're comparing your life, your decisions, to this sense of, I was made from goodness. I am made in the image of God. Therefore, I need to behave that way. And I have to make my choices that way. And it's not easy. But you can ask yourself, was it necessary? What did I do? Where is God in my action? He says, we will make mistakes. But we ask ourselves these questions, and it's not to shame ourselves, but to help ourselves recognize the harm we may inflict. And we do this daily, and it addresses the actions while they're still fresh. Well, maybe there's still an opportunity to go back and make amends. If you leave it for too long, you may never have that chance. And then that behavior can become entrenched in your being. But if you ask yourself, even a couple of hours later, and you realize, ooh, then you go and you try and find the person, you sit down, you talk to them, you apologize, you do whatever. And remember, Christ said, someone asked him, how many times do I have to forgive? 7? Because that was the teaching at the time in the Jewish community. You give the guy 7 chances and then poof, he's gone. He's not allowed to be part of the community. And Christ says 7 times 77, which is another way of saying 40 days and 40 nights, which is another way of saying a very long time, or an infinite number of times. In other words, you never stop forgiving. You never stop making the effort to reach out and bring someone who's done something wrong back into the community. You help them understand what they did and the impact of that, and hopefully they acknowledge their role in it, accept their responsibility, make an apology, but know that they're welcomed back. And at some point in our lives, we're going to be the ones welcoming, and we're going to be the ones that need to be welcomed back. Our practices to be and do good need to be supported with periods of rest. Again, Christ is the model for that. Remember, he works hard, but he would get up and go away for a few days, go away for a month, whatever he needed. And he did it on a regular basis. It wasn't just a 2-week holiday once a year. In some ways, it reminds me of the royal family. Every time I read about them, they're going off on some holiday. But when you're doing 2, 3, 4 engagements a day, 5, 6 days of the week, you get to a point where it doesn't mean anything anymore and you're exhausted and you can get sick. So taking these regular times away to restore your health and your strength and your faith are really important.
Yeah, Christ went to the mountains. He would go to the mountains.
They did on a number of occasions.
Yes.
Yeah. In all the Gospels. So it wasn't just one writing about it, they all did it.
So you have to recharge.
You do. You're like that. You're not the ever ready bunny.
No.
No. The questions here are, the authors describe depravity entering creation not as a tsunami, but as a slow, silent leak, drip by drip. How does this match or differ from your own ideas of evil, about evil? What do you guys think?
That idea of the banality of evil, that we can see that it's something sort of extraordinary or out of the ordinary, but people write about the Holocaust like that it was banal, like
An
people
academic exercise as opposed to dangerous.
well, no, that it was like administrative. Like people said, oh, I was just following orders. My boss told me to do this, so I did it, and it goes down the chain of command. So even the person that sort of presses the button in the gas chamber apparently had a picture of their family, like right there on their desk. It was just like their work. And in the trials afterwards, people said, just following orders. So job, I was doing what I was told. All those kind of excuses, but it makes it easy to see how someone can get from being a regular person to doing something truly evil by those little steps of the system, following the orders.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. And I wonder if that begs the other half of the equation, that someone who slips into that level of evilness, God clearly says there's still goodness in them and they can come back to goodness. I think that's one of the toughest things for us to allow, isn't it? I mean, how many of those folks that push those buttons did we not hang? We hung most of them, as many as we could get our hands on. And I wonder if, therefore, our just system doesn't really allow return to goodness, but which is something God seems to believe in and say is possible. Hard work, but possible. That's a conundrum. Makes me wonder, what would I have done if I was at the Nuremberg trials? Would I have said guilty, hang him, or would I have said guilty? Let's sit down and talk to this guy until he gets it, and then give him a chance to make reparation, to ask forgiveness, and to live some goodness.
Maybe it will depend on what the person who is accused, how his reaction. If he looks as if he's sorry for what he did, maybe your response would be, let's talk to him and change his way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or if he's callous and not showing any remorse, your response will be different.
Yes. Again, it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because Christ says 7 times 77. So you don't give up. You keep going back to this person. We're not very good at that, are we?
Mm-hmm.
When it happens quickly, oh, yes, this is wonderful. But if you took a Mengele or somebody like that, which you might never be able to really reach, but it's hard. The authors mention that tuning out as a habit, and not getting up and going away to the mountains to pray and relax and gain your health and your strength back, that crashing in front of the TV for hours on end are not ways that help us, but that as a habit can allow wrong to become entrenched. So what is insidious about tuning out? Or how does it differ from rest and restoration?
Well, sometimes you just tune out as opposed to really having to face whatever it is you have to face.
I think you're right. I think it's the hard work, isn't it? The active engagement. Because when you're tuning out, you're just tuning out. Rest and restoration isn't something you just sit there and let happen. You are actively engaged in it. You're actively restoring yourself. We're just going to take a short break. The last question that Bishop Tutu asks us for this chapter, which we've kind of already touched on, is how can we stop evil in its tracks simply by paying attention? I suggest he almost gives us the answer, part of the answer. Pay attention.
Attention.
And then what?
On page 91, sometimes it does not take a formal examination of conscience to halt one in one's track. A question, a comment, or an observation can be all it takes to make one turn aside and slide into wrong. I think about his description of the young clerk in the shop calling his father boy, and how those kinds of things still happen today. And people call them microaggressions because they seem small, and it's easy for someone else to say, oh, why are you making a big deal about that? It was just a joke, or that's such a little thing, it doesn't matter, or maybe you got the wrong impression, whatever. But actually all of those things add up. Like being stabbed hundreds of times with a tiny needle, like over the course of a lifetime, that's going to be really painful. And so the idea of, what's the page now? Is it 91?
91, you said.
That if you see or hear someone doing that, that you can make a question, a comment, or an observation, like as a bystander. Even if it's just saying something like, what do you mean by that, when someone says like a joke? Like say the quiet part out loud, like when people are using euphemisms or talking about people, or saying, oh, that's a dodgy neighborhood or something, and it's an implied racial slur. So like point the quiet part. So, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And kind of draw attention.
Or some people make real jokes. You know, they sit and they have jokes about different people, and there's the truth. Are there truths in it? You know, how do you react? Does someone, do you let it go, or do you react and say, that is not the way to do?
That's right. That's right.
Right, and people are embarrassed and they laugh along when they try and ignore it, instead to say, like, that's not funny. Like, why do you think that's funny? But it's hard to do those things, to interrupt.
Isn't there a saying that goes, and I've got it, I don't have it completely. Evil exists because good people do nothing. Do you remember To Kill a Mockingbird, the book and the movie? And there's a scene where Atticus is sitting outside the jail reading at night. What he's doing is protecting the fellow inside. And the kids, Jem and Scout, and Dill, they all come and they're sort of watching, because all of these trucks arrive with all these white men who want to basically kill the gentleman in the jail. And they're standing there, they get out of their trucks, they stand in front of Atticus, and they're yelling at him, give him to us, give us. And Atticus is holding them back, but he's not being very successful. At which point the three kids run up behind him and hold on to him to protect him. And he's like, oh no, this couldn't get worse. And then Scout looks out and she sees a man who her father had helped in the past, and whose son she had, after beating him up, and invited him to lunch at their home, and he'd become a friend. And she looks out and she says, hello, Mr. So-and-so. And everything stops, and that man kind of looks at her. She says, you're so-and-so's father. And he goes, yeah, he's a nice boy. And she just says one or two things like that, and that stops him in his tracks and kind of brings him back to goodness. And he just can't do it anymore. And he sort of says a couple of words, and they all get back in their trucks and they leave. So that's what you're saying. Pay attention, make that comment. She did it.
Identify him as an individual. It doesn't let him get away with being part of a mob.
Yeah.
So then say, oh, I got swept along with the crowd, like I didn't really do anything, it was the group. Like I called him by his name and identified him as an individual.
Yes.
You then
Yes.
would have to take responsibility as an individual for what.
Yeah. It's like Adam passing off responsibility to others rather than standing and saying, you're right, I made that decision and I did those things. Yeah. I'm going to end chapter 5 by reading the prayer, and then Janet's going to lead us in 6. Dear Lord, God is saying, I hear you call as you are falling. You stumble over your own wrongdoing and topple into the bottomless pit of guilt and shame. But there is no abyss. It's an illusion. There is no depth to which you can fall that is beyond my reach. I have lived with you from the age of ages. The dream of you has delighted me. The fact of you pleases me. There is a choice in every moment. In every moment, there is a chance to flourish and not to fail. Every instant is rich with possibility. I have not carved out the path that you must follow. We form the way together, you and I. I have destined for you good, and a field of goodness lies before you. Listen to me, and though the way may not be easy, every step and stone will lead to joy. Turn aside to heed the voice of the tempter, and faltering will mark your journey. I trust you, my child. Even when you have fallen, the road does not end. You can rise up from the ground and turn around. You can repent and head for home in me. Seek me out and you will find me. I have been here from eternity. Until eternity, this is where I will be. I am waiting and you will find me. Amen. Okay, Janet, thank you.
Yeah, I come in.
It's, if you turn, you see they're numbered. Page 4 is the beginning of 6.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Where is God when we suffer? He talked about the village of Mongofa. The Bakwena people, they were forced from their land. Land they had purchased because it was viewed as a black spot, an area inhabited by black people surrounded by white communities. There was an act that said that 10% of 10% of the land was supposed to be going to be bought by the blacks were able to farm. And so these Bakwana people, they had churches, they had schools, a whole community. And the segregationists decided that this was not in their design. This could not exist. We couldn't let this group of people exist. We have to get them out of here. All this is like in the same systemic thing. It's rooted in the segregationist ideology that you have barriers and you can't cross them. These underdogs, these, I don't know what other word you could use, but the Native Land Act said 10% of South Africa's landmass was for Black habitation. And but now it was illegal also for Black people to use to go in and have their cattle grazed on the white farms, the white owned sharecroppers and tenant farmers.
Right, when they were, if I was the white farmer
Yeah,
and I had 100 Black people living on my property because they farmed for me and they lived on my property, but they weren't allowed to graze their cattle on that property. So where would you go?
so you're taking away their livelihood, you're
Mhm.
taking away everything. You undermining their sense of an ability to exist.
Yeah.
And so they were forcibly removed from the land and they had nowhere to graze their cattle. And as it says, by the late 60s, the apartheid government had determined that Mogopa must go, cut off all services. So what they did was they cut off the bus, they withdrew the teachers, they destroyed they demolished the school buildings, they destroyed the clinics, and some people decided that they better get out of their villages.
Mhm.
And as soon as they left, they destroyed their houses, they burned their house. And this is where Desmond Tutu comes in, because and there's a group that decides that this has to stop. You know, you're
Mhm.
taking away the livelihood. The people are already dependent on you for certain things, but you're even going even further and dehumanizing them. And so he comes in with a group of people, and it's a power struggle between the Bakwana and the segregationists. 330 homes gone. They were victims of the Native Land Act, and the results, hundreds lost homes and livelihood. They became the cheap labor force. So it's like
It's almost like enslavement, isn't it?
like what?
It's almost like enslavement. You take
Yeah.
away their home, you take
Yeah.
away their cattle, they have nothing else. They have to become the cheap labor of the white folks.
Yeah.
They have no choice. Yeah.
They thought they had gained a new life when they bought the land.
Yeah.
That instead of self-sufficiency, they were wrong. It wasn't like they didn't get to do the things that normal people do. You know, normal villagers do. The government decided to persuade the community to move voluntarily. I don't know about moving voluntarily.
No.
They're telling them to get
Yeah.
out and go, you know.
Yeah, you're right. Where it doesn't really belong there, does it?
And Desmond Tutu says, it seemed that the evil had triumphed, that how could God let this happen? So do you ask yourself when you are the victim, always you ask, where's God in all this?
Mhm.
But then there's another side to it too that they talk about where he says that you, the victim, the other person is not seeing you as a victim. They just saying this is what exists, and these are the laws of the land,
Mm.
and this is how we want you have supposed to react to it, you know.
Is that like, okay, the laws are in place, so they must be followed and it justifies this behavior?
Yeah,
And if it displaces you from your home and takes away your land, well, you shouldn't have been there in the first place because these are the laws, right? Even though, as you said, they were allowed to purchase this land and build a community, but it was too close to white communities, so they had to get rid of it.
But the abuser always blames the victim, always.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
tell about the all-night village vigil. They gave them 10 days to leave.
Huh.
10 days. So you have to pick up and get out of there. And this group, and the group was made up of the black sash people, women, white women who had the courage of their conviction. So as we were talking before about if you see wrong, respond to it. Out of the goodness of your heart, you respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
These were some of the people who responded.
Mm.
You know,
These were white women with black
Yes.
sashes. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
these are white women. The South African Council and Alan Bossert from the World Congress of Reformed Churches. So they had good people on their side to come out and say, what you are doing is wrong. And they were so adamant about what they were saying that the government pulled back as a result of it. But Tutu, in his humanity, or part of it, he's saying, where is God in all this? You know, the police came, they would remove the families despite whatever. If you were a policeman in that case,
Mhm.
this is what
You're
just
hired
like
to do.
you're talking about the Nazi people. How would you respond if you're a policeman? You're gonna just,
Do your job.
yes. So
Yeah.
and he said, when we have done it seems evil has triumphed. How could God let this happen? When we have done what is good, best and just, and all fails, it is easy to doubt the presence of God.
Mhm.
And evil makes a child of God doubt.
Mhm.
We have been challenged by these thoughts since forever. Is God everywhere? How can God let evil happen? How can God let evil happen?
He asks that question a lot in life. Yeah.
Why did God let callousness reign? And he spoke about the Psalm 44. Psalm 44 in the book.
Sorry, I don't have a copy of that. Let me look it up.
It's in there.
Is it? My book's down.
Rouse
Page
yourself,
101.
rouse yourself. Why do you sleep, O God? Awake, do not cast us off forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and oppression? If you are the victim, this is where you're coming from.
Mhm.
The victim.
Mhm.
What about the victor?
Yeah. Yeah. So why does God let evil happen?
Well, God is everywhere. God is God is good. God made the world for good, but He also gave man choice.
Yeah.
And choice is the main thing.
Mhm.
You know, he told Adam and Eve, you can do whatever you want, but that tree, don't interfere with it. He didn't listen. You don't listen. You don't listen to each other. Sometimes you know what is good to do for somebody, but you don't do it. You let yourself, your wishes.
Mhm.
So the victor in this case, it is satisfying to him to do these instructions, these laws. He doesn't want to, he isn't thinking about the reaction of the victim.
That's true.
And so we keep on saying, well, evil has triumphed. When we have done what is good, just and right, and our best efforts are met with failure, it is easy to doubt the presence of God.
Mhm. Mhm.
He says, we couldn't stop the apartheid machine in that moment. Year followed year, and the dehumanizing segregationists ruled our lives. We knew evil. Evil made a child of God doubt that he or she is a child of God. In this place, evil seems always to hold the winning hand.
Must be a hard place to be stuck in.
Yes. The children in the schools here,
Mm.
you know, things are being done to them, and they're taken away from their homes.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
you destroy the fabric of of their lives, and you don't put anything in place to replace their culture
Mhm.
and stuff like that. Same thing with um, various places like the same South Africa. You destroy the culture of the people,
Mhm.
the, the village life, the, you know, the,
There was a years ago. I did some research up north in the Arctic in a little place called Igloolik. And this was 20, 30 years after the government had, Canada wanted to assure its control over the Arctic, its sovereignty up there. So what they did was they took the Inuit in various places who used to migrate through areas. So they'd be here for the winter, here for the spring, here for the summer. They were following the movement of the animals and the food. But the government said that doesn't make it look like we have established communities. So we're going to build some small villages or towns. And they built, one of them was Igloolik, 742 people when I was up there. And so the Inuit were expected to stay there. But their natural lives, their pattern of their lives were husband, wife, and a bunch of others, kids, others, and they moved and everybody had a role. They had an identity. the husbands would hunt, but the women would treat the food when it came to they would build the housing. They all had roles and they worked together beautifully. But when you took them and put them in one place and provided them with a Southern home and store-bought food, most of those roles were eroded. And the government didn't give them anything to replace those roles or rebuild. And for many decades, you've had a complete collapse of culture and a sense of self at worth in order to satisfy the needs of the government,
Yeah.
which is kind of what's happened here. Only, yeah. I don't know if the government would have been able or even thought to do that or do it the way they did if they were taking a white group and asking them, please, can you live here? We'll supply you with this. We'll give you things that support a culture you're already used to. Where with the Inuit, it was, this is what we're going to do. And you have to comply. And we'll give you things, but you're not used to them and you don't understand them and they don't help you define who you are. So it kind of destroyed them for a long, long time. And we did that here. We're still doing it.
Yeah. I guess that's systemic. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Why God stood by while a community swallowed up by violation of justice? Why did God let callousness reign? Because God is not capricious. Given to sudden and unaccountable changes in mood or behavior. A God who could suspend the laws of nature may soothe us in one moment, but would ever after upend our sense of safety. We could never again rely on the season following season. A capricious God could at any moment decide that order had no place in creation. How can we stop evil in its tracks simply by paying attention? Oh, God is consistent for all humanity. We want freedom to wander until the knowledge that we can return home to God. He is like the father of the prodigal son. It comes back again. Yeah. Waiting for us to come back. Waiting is a challenge for all parents.
Patience, isn't it?
Yeah. The example of God's patience is no easier to emulate when we are the injured party. That's what it's called, the victim and the victor. When you're the injured party, The infinitely forgiving God is a balm to us when we have faltered or failed. The same God is a challenge to us when we have suffered mental anguish and physical harm.
I would think that same God is a challenge to us when we're the reason that somebody else has been hurt. Because God welcomes us back, but God also, I think God expects us to acknowledge what we've done, understand the hurt that it caused, apologize, make some kind of reparation and restoration, and we will be welcomed back. But it's not just like, okay, you did wrong, come on back, everything's okay. It's you did wrong, now you need to understand what you did, why you did it, how you did it, make up for it, and you are welcomed back. Yes, yeah.
We want freedom to wander and the knowledge that we can return home to God. He is like the father of the prodigal son, waiting for us to come back. The infinitely forgiving God is a balm to us. When we have faltered or failed,
Mhm.
the same God is a challenge to us. When we have suffered mental anguish and physical pain and we need it over again.
Mhm.
God does not have a double standard. Somewhere in our secret hearts, we do in fact trust that this is a moral universe where even someone who has committed the most horrific crime can have a spark of goodness in them. So if you're the victim, you would say, well, he's okay, you know. He did that to me, but I can understand where he's coming from. Or
Mhm.
some people would say that, or that might be a reaction, or as you were speaking earlier, you could be very angry, you know.
Or even afraid because you've seen someone do something horrific and you're afraid they'll do it again. So it's hard at times to put all that aside and look for the goodness in that person.
Absolutely.
And they are dictators and despots, but they fade and are overthrown. For example, the end of the Soviet Union, the peace in Northern Ireland. So with time, if we have patience, time and patience, and
Mm-hmm.
we can say this too shall pass.
Yeah.
This too shall pass. And we quote Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So one day you would have justice.
It's hard. I know that sometimes I sit with a family when a member of the family is passed, especially if there's money in an estate. And everything blows up in the family. Somebody wants the money and doesn't want the others to get it. Even if everybody is equally, it's clear that it's going to be divided up equally. There's this horrendous fight that goes on, and somebody tries to take from others, and it's a family. So you start naively thinking, well, you wouldn't do that to me. You're my brother, my sister, my aunt, my uncle. Don't we love each other? Why would this person do this? And yet they do. And it splits families up. It causes tremendous heartache, distrust, anger, fear. And you wonder in the middle of all of that if you will ever get to a place of healing where the goodness in everyone is allowed to flourish. And that means the person who's trying to steal from everybody realizes that what they're doing is wrong, and they come back to goodness. And all those sitting around the table who feel like they're the victims, finding it in their hearts to welcome that person back and rebuild the goodness in the family. Sometimes it never happens. At least it doesn't happen in that generation. But sometimes it happens in the next generation. It's a terrible thing to see.
He said that too.
Does he?
That sometimes we react good and we react to it, and it is not, we never live to see the goodness up.
Okay.
Sometimes we never live to see the goodness up. Sometimes. Evil indeed may hold sway for the moment, but evil does not have the last word. In 1994, the people of Mogopa were able to return home.
Okay. So that arc of justice.
Yeah.
Okay.
They saw beyond the immediacy of their concerns. They continued to challenge the injustices done to them. Sometimes struggles seem wrapped in futility.
Mm.
Suffering is part of the human condition. It teaches us our limitations and our vulnerability. We can choose to let suffering drive us into community or drive us apart.
Mm.
The shame of victimhood can be the most isolating kind of suffering. So, again, we have a choice how we react to what is being done to us. But in God's eyes, there is no hierarchy of suffering. God suffers with all of us. God wills our healing.
Mm.
Suffering can redeem for us hidden gifts. Compassion grows, recognition of how we love grows. Compassion may not be able to change anything, but it is to see with God's eye view. And that word, Ubuntu, comes up again.
Mhm.
Remember, it came up
Mm,
earlier.
oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. It helps us to endure, knowing that our suffering in this moment may not be redeemed in our lifetime, as we were talking about just now,
Okay.
but in our children's lifetime. The suffering endurer may receive no gifts, but the wider community will.
Okay. So sometimes it's bigger than us.
Yeah.
Me.
And he quotes Dame Julian of Norwich, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well.
That's
Whatever we suffer, the God who sees eternity stands with us in the heart of our suffering. So God is always there with us, no matter what questions we come up with. Where is God? Where He's right there with us,
Mhm.
alongside us.
Mhm.
And the questions that come up from this chapter is also suggests that God does not intervene in suffering and wickedness because God is consistent.
So
Why does it keep God from stepping in?
it's as if, okay, this is how the universe has been set, how creation has been divined. And we need to find our place within it rather than redefining creation every time we have a different whim or want or need or whatever, because that doesn't give consistency. It also suggests maybe we're only one part of creation. And to constantly rewrite creation for us is incredibly selfish when it's not just us. It's everything. It's all that's out there, the birds, trees, the land, everything. And there is an order to creation, isn't there? There's the seasons that follow upon each other. There's, energy isn't lost or created. It shifts different forms, but yeah.
I remember reading somewhere, I probably not remember this fully right, but it's something like someone asked God, why is all this suffering in the world and you don't do anything about it? And God said, why don't you do anything about it?
Job. Sounds like Job. Yeah. Because in the book of Job sort of asks that question about himself. Why did you do this to me? Why did you destroy my family and everything I had? And I mean, who are you? Why? And God says, were you there when I created the heavens and the earth? Well, no, of course I wasn't. And you never will be, because you are not me. And you will never have the full scope and understanding that I, as God, do. You can't. You're not God. So do the best you can within this little part of the creation that you exist, but also see yourself as part of something bigger. And even then you'll never fully get it, but you can live out goodness. I think I hear him saying that we can live out goodness. In part because we were made
out
that
of
way.
that suffering comes some good. Could you say that?
You could, I mean, you read that you may not feel it, but your children might.
Yeah.
Or your society does. I mean, us being able as a global community to sit down and begin to address climate change only comes after we had sat down and begun to address human rights. And we didn't do that 200 years ago. We're slowly, not fast enough, recognizing that we're part of a bigger creation and that we need to live within that, not subject it to our wants and all the time. And it's hard for us. It's hard. We're taking small steps in the right direction, but and for some it's not fast enough, of course. Like countries like India that are coal dependent, and China that to some degree are coal dependent. It's going to take them, it's going to be a lot harder for them to switch off coal than us. And then how do we help them do that rather than just pointing a finger and saying, no, you've got to do this. But we couldn't have done that 50 years ago. We couldn't have sat down around that table and even had that conversation. So, yeah.
And at the end here, he says, the God who sees eternity stands with us in the heart of our suffering. Whether we suffer with the goal of a better life in mind or when we suffer in sympathy with others, God stands beside us. Failure brings with it a particular kind of suffering, and when our pain is of our own making, we are not left to enjoy it alone. Even if we made the wrong choice, we are not there to.
We're not alone.
No, we're not alone.
God is always with us.
So
he's like the prodigal father waiting for us. Yeah, please.
I'll read the prayer. I have seen suffering make heroes of some of my children. The strength with which they endure their pain is a shining example to all. But sometimes, child, suffering is only suffering. It seems gratuitous. It feels meaningless. It teaches nothing. It brings no gifts. It just is. It just is, and you feel alone, abandoned, forsaken. You think I have gone, so you run. Your mind skitters away from the hurt. Your body shrinks away from the pain. Your heart tries to shut itself against the suffering. I see you run. You don't believe that I am with you, but I am there. When you stop running from the pain and turn to face it, when you can step into the agony and let it be, when you can turn to your own suffering and know its name, then you will see me. You will see me in the heart of it with you. It doesn't matter if your body is racked by pain or your mind is spiraling through aches and anguish. When you stop running, you will see me. I will not forsake you. I cannot abandon you. You are not alone. I am with you.
Thank you.